Kia ora! Hello! Welcome to the latest episode of Medieval Sewing Made Easy, this being how to attach a facing to a garment opening, 14th century style. In this episode, I'll be partly fulfilling a promise from some time ago to make a video detailing how to apply a facing strip to a 14th century garment. I'm expecting we will release a video on how to do this in a medieval way. This will most likely end up being the first in a short series of facings videos. The archaeological finds from 14th century London indicate that there seem to have been a number of different ways to apply a facing, but I'm just going to talk about one of them today. This type seems to have been used on neck edgings. I'm Ocean, and this is Populaurbanum, a show where we discuss reenactment and the medieval middle class. This is a natural coloured linen and a dark red woolen coating or broadcloth to simulate a late medieval fabric as closely as possible. Examples of extant facings I've seen images of are not cut on the bias grain as we would today. Medieval facings are cut on the straight grain, but do not fear, they still mould to the shape of the garment edge. I've used this facing technique on a neckline with a tight curve and it works fine. Cut out your strip of fabric to the right length. You will need to add about 2 centimeters to the total finished length of the edge so that you have some seam allowance to play with. Now I need to cut this perfectly on the straight grain, so I have a little trick for making sure that it's on the straight grain. I begin by cutting along one thread. And then once I have a loose thread, I pull on it until it comes loose from the fabric, and that now marks out a straight line in the weave that I can cut along, and that gives me a perfectly straight grain line from which to work, and that's also the edge of my facing. Now I'm just using the same trick to mark out the other side of my facing strip. If you're directly copying an extant example and you have data about the width of the facings, use that as a guide. For example, the neck facing fragments from London use what are described as 5mm facing strips with a 3mm turned edge on the wool garment fabric. I'll assume that 5mm means a 5mm finished measurement, in other words not including seam allowances, so presumably the facing strip was cut to about 5 plus 3 plus 3mm, which equals 11mm. We're going to be using 2 facing strips today because I'll show you 2 possible ways of attaching the facing. I can't attest to whether one method or another was done in the 14th century, but once completed, these 2 methods both seem consistent with the appearance and description of the London finds. You can use linen or silk thread, depending on the luxuriousness of your garment. There is evidence to support the use of both. Today I'm using linen to match the colour of my outer fabric. In the first method, we will apply the facing directly to the wrong side of the fabric or the inside of the garment using overcast or hem stitching all along the folded inner edge of the facing. Firstly, finger press the edge of the facing fabric approximately 3 or 4 millimeters from the edge. Linen takes a finger press really well due to the nature of the fibre. Silk will not accept finger pressing as readily, in which case use either a low temperature iron or lots of pins to assist you. Alternatively, you can slightly moisten the silk to help it to fold. Flip the facing over and pin it to the edge of the garment as shown, so that the edge you have not pressed is flush with the raw edge of the garment and the pressed edge looks neat. Pin that into place. Now we're going to make a line of small overcast or hem stitches along the folded edge. And please see our video in the series Medieval Sewing Made Easy for a tutorial on how to do that stitch. Make these stitches only a few millimeters apart and only catching a few threads of the outer fabric on each stitch. The stitching is almost invisible on both the inside and the outside. Here's a close-up for you, and you can see how fine the stitches are and the raw edges are lined up. Just continue along to the end. Here I've completed the line of overcast stitches, and now the facing strip is ready for finishing on the other side with a line of running stitches. This runs along the outer edges to join the facing and fabric together, which I'll now demonstrate. Fold back the raw edges of your facing and your garment fabric, each approximately 3 to 4 millimeters, making sure your facing does not protrude beyond the edge of the garment. You can finger press or use pins or a low temperature iron if necessary. Wool responds really well to steam, but will permanently mark when in direct contact with an iron, so I recommend a pressing cloth in between your iron and the wool. Medieval people may have used an iron and a damp cloth to get a steaming effect, although I'm not certain that irons were in common use until the 15th century. Next, make a line of small running stitches along the edge, around 1 to 2 millimeters from the folded edges, and see our video Medieval Sewing Made Easy, episode 1, for instructions on how to do a running stitch. You might find it's easier to make these stitches as a stab stitch, where the stitch line is executed in 2 motions rather than 1, as long as very little of the thread shows on the face of the garment and the stitches are kept very small. Here's a close-up for you of the result of a stab stitch to edge. Now I'll make a proper running stitch, in other words, making several stitches in one motion. Some extant fragments lead me to believe that both methods may have been used, sometimes in the same stitch line. The result is slightly different but still consistent with 14th century textile fragments of garment facings. You can see that the stitching is barely visible on the outside of the garment. And just continue to the end of the facing. Now that's finished and we have a 14th century style facing attached to a broadcloth garment edge. I'll quickly show you an alternative method that you may find easier. I know I do. And take your fabric facing and lay it flush with the raw edge of the garment on the outside of the garment. In other words, the right side of the fabric. Just pin it down as needed. Run a line of basting stitches or large running stitches approximately 3 millimeters from the edge. Don't knot off the ends of the thread though. Now that's finished, just finger press the other edge of your facing, around 3 to 4 millimeters. And flip the entire facing over to the inside of the garment. and pin it down. Run your line of overcast stitches along the inner folded edge as before. And then make your line of running stitches along the outer basted edge. This should be a lot easier now because your two folded edges have already been secured with a basting thread. That's finished. Now remove the basting thread, leaving the line of running stitches holding those folded edges together. And you're done. The neck facings from London include an additional line of running stitches running through the facing, so you can now make that in between the existing rows of stitches if you like. And here's my sample all finished. The facing strips are quite a lot wider than the original, and I urge you to consult the book Textiles and Clothing for the original specifications if you wish to make an historically accurate reproduction. See the link in the description. Also, please click on the far superior video about this very topic by Company of the Staple. Their method, which is slightly different, is wholeheartedly endorsed by me. Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I guess this means you enjoyed the video. So stay safe, have fun, and keep reenacting.